Hello and most welcome to 1777 of the Heidegger series. We will today do the B side of Warren Goldfarb's Wittgenstein on understanding. And we will continue where we left off in 1776, the A side. If you want, you can see these as the two sides of the coin, verse and recto. Actually, we finished 110, so we can start afresh at 111. We were just in the beginning of the article, but so far we have taken up the idea of priorism, or the idea that language, science, or anything has a pre-developmental way of going about things. They will come about in a specific order that is decided from the very beginning. And the only thing we know so far is that we're going to see what Wittgenstein sees when it comes to the investigation of mind, understanding, knowledge, and perception. I think all of you are quite acquainted with these rather reoccurring terms from Paul Johnston, Joachim Schulte, Edmund Dane, and so forth. They are no doubt very important for the understanding of Wittgenstein. And it's also the problem of the inner that we went closely by in the book Rethinking the Inner by Paul Johnston's excellent hand. And I really like this from paragraph 131. It's close to the end of the middle here. Preconceived ideas to which reality must correspond. So we do not accept reality as it is. We tell reality what it should be. And we will continue now on page 111. Moreover, the response leaves it open that understanding, although not conceptually constituted by a neural state, might be empirically constituted by one. This underreads Wittgenstein's conclusion. Thus, the suggested response does too little. Yet it is not totally off the mark, for Wittgenstein does think that the identification of any state of understanding would have to bear some conceptual burden. His conclusion will be that in some sense, nothing is hidden. But this is meant to result from detailed considerations of the notion of understanding, not to be assumed more or less as a premise, as an unargued feature of his methodology. The notion that Wittgenstein dismisses or ignores questions of empirical identity also reinforces the view of him as simply anti-scientific. Now we do know that Wittgenstein was distrustful of the claims of science and its role in contemporary culture. He makes this quite explicit when he expresses his opposition to the spirit of the age in the foreword to the philosophical remarks. And the theme is repeated elsewhere in his work, both early and late. Some have gone on to ascribe to him a hostility to or belittling of projects aimed at scientific explanation of such proportions as to depict him as simply dogmatic and blinkered. Bernard Williams, for example, complains that Wittgenstein's general practice and teaching serve to stun rather than assist further and more systematic explanation, and offers as illustration a story about Wittgenstein used by Georg Kreisel in 1960 as evidence for Wittgenstein's hostility to legitimate scientific explanation. The story bears repeating. Imagine a child learning that the earth is round, asking why then people in Australia don't fall off. I suppose one natural response would be to start to explain about gravity. Wittgenstein instead would draw a circle with a stick figure atop it, turn it upside down and say, now we fall into space. Now, I myself do not find the story emblematic of an attitude against science or a desire to stun further explanation. In fact, I think it shows Wittgenstein being highly insightful, for his examining the source of the child's question in the concepts with which the child is operating. Given those concepts, an appeal to gravity can do nothing but mislead. The child will take it that the antipodal people are upside down, but they have gravity shoes or glue or something similar that keeps them attached to the surface of the earth. As for us, we are right side up, so the problem does not arise. What Wittgenstein's trick does is precisely to expose the conceptual confusion in the way the child is thinking of up and down. Once the child sees the reality in the notions of up and down, she may then go on to ask, well, why don't all these objects, us, the Australians, and the earth, go careening around independently? Or perhaps then, why do objects fall down rather than up? Once the child sees the relativity in the notions of up and down, she may then go on to ask, well, why don't all these objects, us, the Australians, and the earth, go careening around independently? Or perhaps, then why do objects fall down rather than up? At that point, explaining gravity might well be in order. The child is now prepared to appreciate correctly. The lesson, of course, is general. It is central to Wittgenstein's teaching that the conceptual underpinnings to a felt need for explanation must be scrutinized for what it is exactly that one's explanation may only become clear through such an investigation. This does not make him anti-scientific. It does make him anti-scientistic against the smug and unexamined assurance that what one's explanation is obvious and that scientific tools are immediately applicable. For Wittgenstein, it is characteristic of the notions that figure in philosophical problems, prominently mental concepts and linguistic concepts like meaning, that a structure is imposed on them without grounding in the ordinary use of these notions and without being noticed when they are taken to be amenable to certain explanatory projects. Much work in the investigations, on my view, is precisely devoted to getting us to notice, to see that there is a place at the start of philosophizing where this imposition happens. Hence, only through clarification of what the legitimate questions are can proper sense be made of applicability of science. It's better to leave like 5-6 lines. A scientific viewpoint ignores this need for clarification. As a result, for Wittgenstein, scientism is just as misguidedly metaphysical as traditional, more transparently a prioristic approaches. I am depicting Wittgenstein as thinking that conceptual work must be done before the question of applicability of science should be raised. Now, it is also true that whatever empirical scientific results may legitimately be foreseen or hypothesized after that work is done are of little interest to Wittgenstein. He seems to believe that what is really at issue in a philosophical question will be answered or dissolved by the conceptual work and not touched by science. That is, science is simply not of use in dealing with the sorts of problems with which he is concerned. But this broad characterization can be misleading. Wittgenstein is not being dismissive. He is not urging a distinction between questions of the mind versus questions of the heart, nor is he saying that in doing science we are talking about different things, for he would have little patience with Eddington's 2 tables and with Goodman's different worlds. Moreover, as I mentioned above, I do not believe that he wishes to rely on a sharp distinction between conceptual and empirical. That is a Freudian divide between logic and analysis on the one hand and mere psychology and physics on the other. Rather, Wittgenstein operates case by case. For each philosophical question we treat, we are to tease out what we are aiming for, or what we think we are aiming for, and then to come to see how our objectives will not be served by a scientific investigation, and we are to recognize how the inclination to look to science for answers elides or ignores so much as to suggest that a philosophical picture is at work. This point is made in paragraph 158. The one explicit appearance in the investigations of something like a scientific objection Here he suggests that although the objection says that the scientific investigation may come out either way, that is only a scientific hypothesis or conjecture that such and such a process or state will be found at bottom. The objector is being moved by an a priori demand that things must turn out a certain way. We could wait there, actually. I think it's better to, until a small paragraph is finished. The claim of a modest empiricism is mere lip service. With respect to understanding, the point might be phrased thus. Wittgenstein asks us to look in detail at the range of our practices relevant to an ascription of understanding. We find an enormous variety of considerations that can enter. A dependence on context that is impossible to describe accurately by any general rules. A lack of uniformity in mental accompaniments. In individual cases, we have stories to tell to justify our ascriptions, but there's no uniform feature that pulls the various cases together. It is, we could leave like 5-6 lines before we move. It is just this that can drive us to think that there must be some final item behind the phenomena that grounds each ascription. That is what the ascription is an ascription of. We feel that without this, the ascriptions would be arbitrary. If it is at such a juncture that the scientific objection is voiced, if the objector is saying, even though our ascriptive practices now show no uniform features, That's only because we have too little acquaintance with what goes on in the brain and the nervous system. Then the roots of the objection in the a priori demands that something unitary and definite must ground the ascription are evident. If we accept this diagnosis, then the scientific objection is undercut for its attractive empirical stance. Its appearance of making only the modest claim that things might turn out either way. We might or we might not discover an appropriate neural state is seen to be a pretense. The objection thus loses its scientific cachet, and with that, its particularity as an objection. It becomes just a restatement of a picture of what has to be there. Wittgenstein's work is meant first and foremost to free us from such pictures. If this is done, it will also free us from the desire to object in this way. In sum, Wittgenstein's first reaction to the scientific objection is to examine when we are inclined to bring it up and for what particular purpose. And then he asks whether we are sincere in our empiricist stance, or rather whether we see a must creeping into our language. If so, then what is operative at bottom are a priori demands on the mental notions. Such demands are the focus of Wittgenstein's investigations of mental concepts. Through his treatment of them, we can develop themes concerning the scientific objection that are more general than the reaction or diagnosis just canvassed. If his investigations succeed, we shall lose the idea of the specific, particular process or state that is the understanding, along with the idea that we need such a thing. But then the question will arise of what the progress of science was supposed to have provided according to the objection. That is, Wittgenstein's investigations are to have the effect of making entirely obscure what could be scientifically discoverable that would be the mental state or process of understanding. Since, if you will, there's nothing for it to be, there's no role for it to play. In Wittgenstein's considerations, I see two predominant strands, perhaps separated only at the cost of some distortion. The first concerns how the state is conceived to operate. The idea under scrutiny is that the state of understanding is the source from which flow the manifestations of understanding. Wittgenstein asks whether we have any conception of the flowing from, any conception of what we are asking of the state when we take it as issuing in, determining, fixing what counts as manifestation of the understanding. The second strand concerns the range of things the particular state or process is supposed to do. Here, The strategy involves examining the topography of understanding and manifestations of understanding in varieties of circumstances. It entails the laying out of particular cases, which is part of what Wittgenstein calls a grammar investigation. Let me start with a first strand. The definite state of understanding that Wittgenstein wants to deny is meant to be the state that in and of itself in some way determines everything that counts as a manifestation of that understanding. Wittgenstein argues that this notion is confused. It is based on misconstrual of the models we have in which samples, pictures, formulas, standards, and so on can issue in or determine or fix the characterizations of items. In order to pass from disguised nonsense to patent nonsense, paragraph 464. An example less abstract than understanding might be helpful. I shall present one from cognitive science which illustrates Wittgenstein's point vividly. Several years ago, I was intrigued to read a newspaper item with the headline, "Mental tuning forks noted in perfect pitch." It began, "New evidence has been found that people with perfect pitch, the ability to recognize a note that they hear without having to identifying pitch sounded beforehand, use a special set of mental tuning forks other people lack." the findings suggest that these folks let them distinguish between pitches by recognizing each tone. I think rather put a stop here. It's a new thing emerging here. We'll leave that for the next time. Sorry to stop mid-in. I think that is strategically correct, although we would be given some more explanation of this more complex thing. So I think you noticed clear and well that, yes, recognizing each note is the last one. Thank you very much, Kalle. Very well. Very good. So in this last a priorism or priorism, what a word, is being more developed and coming to be more mapped. First nice sites, there are quite some quotes here, is on page 111. If we please could go there, Kalle. It is this excellent example and it's introducing us to the subject. The nothing is hidden. So line 7, I think it is, or 6. But this is meant to result from detailed considerations of the notion of understanding, not to be assumed more or less as a premise, as an unargued feature of his methodology. And here we have a hint that we could have, wrongly to a certain extent, acquired rules for what counts as understanding. And the motto, nothing is hidden, is part of that disclosure of a tendency. We have an example with a child, and the point here is the child is not given wrong information at all, but it is not on the level of the child, which makes it, I would say, worse than wrong. And accusing Wittgenstein to be anti-scientific by that is in itself maybe a bit childish. Sorry. But we have a quote at the end of the 3rd paragraph. At that point, explaining gravity might well be in order. The child is now prepared to appreciate it correctly. He introduces the child that Goldfarb Wittgenstein does for us to understand that preemptive understanding is the worst thing. It will mislead us gravely. And it is most often part of a sort of a priorism of what is understanding. What he is against, if he is against anything, is what is called scientism, or people who are scientistic, that mix different levels. What he does understand, instead, we can see on page 112, excellently written by Warren Goldfarb, to be put in gold. It's the third paragraph to the very end of it, beginning with moreover. Moreover, as I mentioned above, I do not believe he wishes to rely on a sharp distinction. The sharp is important here. Do underline that in your mind. It doesn't say there is no distinction at all, but it's the very sharpness. A sharp distinction between conceptual and empirical. That is a Freudian divide between logic and analysis on the one hand, and mere psychology and physics on the other. And here, listen to what Wittgenstein does. Rather, Wittgenstein operates case by case. What does that mean? Well, there are no classical laws of physics for understanding. A priori, created, and lasting for eternity. For each philosophical question we treat, we are to tease out what we are aiming for, or what we think we are aiming for, and then to come to see how our objectives will not be served by a scientific investigation. And we are to recognize how the inclination to look to science for answers elides or ignores so much as to suggest that a philosophical picture is at work. And here we got a handful. This last part of paragraph 3 is smack full of indication and hints. We are now getting close to the philosophical picture. And the philosophical picture, and you can take note of that, is part the a priorism, which you can read in the next paragraph to the end. And I will cut mid-sentence and begin with that it is only a scientific hypothesis or conjecture that such and such a process or state will be found. At bottom, the objector is being moved by an a priori demand that things must turn out a certain way. The claim of modest empiricism is mere lip service. When I read linguistic, it all was like that. Everything in language was a priori decided by someone. I felt it to be highly subjective that one person, like Chomsky and his followers, could decide what language can turn out to be, or what it does without context, without intentions, emotions, desires, how the world look, nothing about the world. To Chomsky, that didn't seem to be a world at all. We go to 113. A dependence on context that is impossible to describe accurately by any general rule. A lack of uniformity in mental accompaniments, that is what we think, what images we have, what our emotions for the moment are. And the trick, or how one is getting tricked, is that it is just this that can drive us to think that there must be some final item behind the phenomena that grounds each ascription. I have some more quotes. I won't bring them because we're going long here. But that last sentence, that there is a phenomena that grounds each ascription, is the generalized original. It could be the Qumran scrolls. It could be the latest translation of Linear B from Crete. It could be the utmost atom, the Higgs particle. It could be the very latest take on Big Bang that decided all the a priori laws that followed. And that is part of the illusion, that is part of the picture. And this is what we are, as Wittgenstein says, being mesmerized by. And we become mesmerized by it by our own intelligence. It is a luring thing to think of, like Chomsky, sorry to pointing him out. It's a lure of the intellect that everything is decided. And it makes you incredibly important for yourself, at least. Because in your hands, how you decide your classical rules will rule the world. Maybe there are some, but I think that's taking it too far, megalomaniac tendencies. No, that's too far. I will bring my kinder colleague into the game here. Please welcome Kalle Lundahl.
Thank you, Hans. Let's go to page 111. 111. Let me also comment on this phrase, nothing is hidden. This goes against Heidegger's philosophy, because in Heidegger's philosophy you have this gay, so to say, hiddenness, and what is obvious or what is on the surface. These are aletheia, like it's a play between aletheia and lethe, hiddenness. What does Wittgenstein mean? So let's say pictures as an example. We have two kinds of pictures. One is material pictures like drawings, paintings, material objects, and then we have pictures in our heads, imagination. In this case, it's more like these mental pictures. For it's not that Wittgenstein does not consider them important, but they don't constitute a move in the landscape. So imagination and the hiddenness, that is what we have in our heads, do not constitute a move in the landscape. If you don't put things in act, if you are a painter, if you only think nice pictures in your head, it doesn't help you. You have to actually paint them also. In
Oh,
that
very
sense.
good. Yes, indeed. What a good metaphor. A painter with loads of images in her head. That would not help the painter become great.
Mm.
There's
And let us
exactly.
also, thank you. Also, let us mention also this 1960 example by George Kreisel and vision. So Wittgenstein would draw a circle with a stick figure atop it. He would draw a circle with a stick figure atop it, turn it upside down and say, now we fall into space. The point is that Wittgenstein puts the observer, he emphasizes the observer. It's not about Australians, but it's about us.
Yes.
Yes, universe
He
is
considers
huge.
the observer, and he also considers the observer of the child, so the formulation is apt for the child.
There is also a sense of adventure also perhaps in this. It's not this, I don't think Wittgenstein wants to frighten the child, but perhaps give a sense of adventure. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope not.
I perhaps I don't know how teacher or schiller he was. But the point is that the observer is always there. It's we who is the main focus. We are in the language game. We are doing the things. We could fall into the space.
Yeah, most definitely. And to talk to the child directly, as this, what was his name, Chrysler wanted to do, is ludicrous. The child simply wouldn't understand. And it will also block further understanding for the child. I have some examples. I have two people I've interviewed earlier, a couple of years ago, and they were exposed to ideas in astrophysics at an early age. And they didn't understand anything, but they got into a phobic state of fear of not being grounded anywhere when they were showed a big TV screen with empty space and nowhere to stand. And both of these girls, now women, are still suffering from that. It's ignoring the observer, the poor child who is the receiver. And the explanation at that level, at least at that level, doesn't put the observer into the game. And that is, of course, very frightful.
Mm. And 1969, as we know, the man landed on the moon. But 3 years earlier, 1966, came the first pictures from the space. 1966 came from the first pictures. And one famous person who saw them was Heidegger.
Oh, you
And he
kidding?
was,
Wow.
yes, he saw these pictures and he was frightened.
Okay.
It's not explicitly stated why, but I suppose that it shows this empty space without the observer.
Yes, exactly right. Very good. And it does terrible injustice to the children as well. This Kreisel is not a person you imagine to have children himself. It's it's scary with empty space with no observer, just seeing the photos. Yeah, I do agree there. Some horror movies And I think especially the movie Alien from 1986, or was it 4? It's using that empty space. There's nothing to stand on. It is hostile to human conditions, and it begins dehumanized with a robot to listen, give that eerie feeling. And I think such a movie, apart from being very good, I think is actually depicting what people are sensing when we are like Georg Kreisel. We don't understand the observer should come in. And we sort of frighten ourselves. So we are already a bit scared. Just me going on out on a line here, sorry, but it's something I thought of.
Absolutely, and I think this phrase, or this example by Wittgenstein, is an example that Wittgenstein does not draw any sharp distinctions between conceptual and empirical.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
this,
There
this
could
is
be some distinctions, but there is no sharp a priori distinction.
mm, I would be interested one day to look into Feyerabend. Didn't he teach that the Earth was flat?
Yeah, it would be actually good old Feyerabend. There are some conceptual arguments because actually the most flattest thing you can ever stumble upon will be more round than the surface of the earth. And I would say preemptively, and this is me speaking, not Goldfarb or Wittgenstein, and to preemptively expose children to say to them the world is round could put them into, I wouldn't think a shock, but it would block understanding for them, and that block could be forever. Because if it comes in at the wrong level, when they're just learning to understand what roundness is, by coming into contact with balls and such things, and somebody says, oh, the earth is round, and you see the world being flat. You missed on out of the H there, pitch, CH at the end.
We discuss this next time, but I think it's good to already look into this.
Yeah, very good, Kalle.
Let me see. Should I perhaps, I don't know if I should press this or image. Let me see builder images. If it gives a good image, what they are.
Maybe we can begin the next lecture with an image of one of those things or something like that. Could be nice. I do not have a mental tuning fork myself at all. I would never be able to imitate a note in music. But that for the next, what do you say, Kalle? Maybe we should.
Yes, perhaps we should enter us. Yes.
Thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl, for participating. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. Thank you, Warren Goldfarb. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.